So in this video, we want to emphasize the order of operations. So when we need to simplify an expression. So an expression is something like down below here, where it's just a bunch of addition, subtraction, multiplication, different parentheses. We want to take all of that and simplify it to a number. And when we get to more algebra, we would want to make a simpler expression. So maybe we'd have a variable involved. In this video, we're just focusing on numbers and how would we simplify that down. So what we need to do is know, what do we start with? Because it isn't as simple as just reading left to right. Sometimes it is, but most of the time we need to pay attention to the parentheses and the exponents at work first. Then we can take care of multiplication, division. Then we can take care of addition, subtraction. Now, a common phrase out there that you have heard, maybe if you've done some algebra already, is Pemdas. That tells us the order to go in. However, there is a slight flaw with Pemdas, and that is because actually multiplication and division are done at the same time. So this ordering can make it look like that we do multiplication before division, but that's not true. We actually do them at the same time. Same goes for addition and subtraction. We do those at the same time because those operations are very closely related. So Pemdas is a great tool for remembering this, but try to remember that it looks more like this. So we take care of parentheses first. So any grouping symbols, which can look like this, where this last one is actually an absolute value symbol. Another grouping symbol is when you have a fraction. So you actually wouldn't see any parentheses, but if you have something like this, they're kind of these invisible parentheses where you're grouping the numerator all together and grouping the denominator all together. So there is grouping happening there with the idea that we would want to completely simplify the numerator first, then completely simplify the denominator, and at the end we would divide. So we'll talk about those different scenarios down below, but basically any parentheses or grouping symbols, we want to simplify those first. Once all the parentheses are simplified, then we look to exponents. That's what the E represents, is exponents, and calculating those. And then we move on to any multiplication and division. So we do these at the same time, and this we carry out from left to right. So if we have a string of multiplication and division, say we have like 2 times 5 divided by 8 times 10 times 5. So if it's all just multiplication and division, what we would do is start with the 2, carry out that multiplication first. So we'd have 10 divided by 8, and then we'd simplify that. And then we would multiply by 10, and then we would multiply by 5. So simplifying goes as we would read a sentence from left to right. Then the very last thing we do is addition and subtraction. So all addition, subtraction that's outside of parentheses is saved to the end. So this is the same that we do this from left to right. So if I had like 2 plus 5 minus 8 plus 10 plus 5, we would do 2 plus 5 first, then subtract the 8, then add 10, then add 5. So left to right, simplifying down. Okay, before we get to big expressions down here, I want to emphasize the importance of parentheses with exponents, especially when we get into dealing with negative numbers. Now, we haven't dealt with negative numbers too much. We'll talk about that more in the next lectures with integers. So here we'll kind of revisit the topic, but as we're simplifying these expressions, I want to make sure we can do these. So exponent just shortens multiplication. So 2 squared is the same thing as 2 times 2. So that's a positive 4 there. Not too bad. When we have parentheses, what's being squared is the parentheses itself. So it's like anything that's contained in there, that's getting multiplied to itself. So with this, we would have a negative 2 times negative 2. And what we'll talk about when we get to integers is that a negative times a negative is positive. So this would actually be a positive 4. So with an exponent with parentheses, everything that's in the parentheses gets contained with it, and that's what gets squared. Without parentheses, that negative just keeps hanging out front. What's being squared here is just the 2. If it helps, you could even rewrite this. It's like we have a negative 1 times 2 squared. And what we already found is 2 squared is a positive 4. So like a negative 1 times 2 times 2, which is positive 4. So that ends up being negative. So basically, with the parentheses, the negative gets squared. Without the parentheses, the negative just kind of continues hanging out front. All right, let's look at 2 more examples here with that. So like this one would be the same thing as negative 4 times 4. So negative 4 squared, because without the parentheses, the negative just stays out front. So 4 times 4 is 16. However, with this one, with the parentheses get squared. So we'd have negative 5 inside both of those. So negative 5 times negative 5 would be a positive 25. Okay, like I said, that jumps a little ahead to integers, but I just want to make sure we kind of address this, and I'm going to bring it up so many times because this is just one of those things where little mistakes happen the most often for all students. So I want to make sure I keep clarifying that. Okay, let's go on down here to our order of operations. So we're going to take care of parentheses, exponent, multiplication and division, addition, subtraction at the end. So this first one here, no parentheses, so we don't need to worry about that. No exponents, so we don't need to worry about that. So now we're at the multiplication division stage, and that's happening right here. So we want to focus on simplifying this 2 times 4. So we're going to have the 8 stays there. We still have subtraction. 2 times 4 is 8. And then we just keep the plus 5. So everything else stays the same. We don't do any subtraction or addition. Multiply first. Now, multiplication, division's done. So now we're just doing addition, subtraction, and we're going to go from left to right. So I'm going to start with the 8 minus 8, which is 0. Then we still have this plus 5. 0 plus 5 is 5. And we're done. But the most common mistake with a problem with like this is people doing the 8 minus 2 first. We can't start with subtraction. We need to take care of any multiplication division first before we can move on. Also, real quick, multiplication symbols. You'll see this little star symbol. Sometimes you'll see a dot. That's also multiplication. Sometimes parentheses are used for multiplication. So if you see 2 numbers next to each other with just parentheses, that means they're multiplying with each other. One thing you won't see anymore that you maybe saw in previous math classes is x being used for multiplication. However, getting into algebra, where we use x as a variable, we do not want to do that. So all of these represent multiplication, and you can choose to use whichever you like best. So a little star, dot, or parentheses. Okay, let's go on to this next one here, which has a lot more going on. So we have parentheses. So what I'm going to do is first see this large grouping here, but then within the parentheses, we have another set of parentheses. So really, I want to start there. So we want to simplify the most inner parentheses first. I'm going to leave everything else the same. So 8 divided by 2 plus 2, square bracket, 5 plus 3. And in those parentheses, we have 9 minus 4, which is 5. And that is this little caret symbol. represents an exponent. So what I could do is go ahead and just put it there. And then we'll have that. Okay, so reevaluating. We have these parentheses. We have that second set of parentheses, but that's all simplified. So we're in these parentheses and we want to simplify. So now we go to exponent. So I want to simplify this 5 squared. So I'm going to keep everything else the same. Essentially what happened is like I restarted Pemdas inside of this set of parentheses. So it's like inside of here, I went, okay, evaluate parentheses. Now I'm doing exponent. So inside the square brackets, we have 5 plus 3 times 5 squared, which is 25. All right, still in these parentheses here simplifying. We did parentheses, exponent, and now we're going to do multiplication. So everything else is staying the same. 5 plus 3 times 25 is 75. Okay, still in these parentheses, took care of parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, and now we just have addition left. So 8 divided by 2 plus 2 times 5 plus 75, which is 80. Okay, so those parentheses are all simplified now. No more exponents. So now we can go on to multiplication, division. So we have this 8 divided by 2. We also have this 2 times 80. In terms of order, we would do the 8 divided by 2 first because we're reading from left to right. So we have 4 plus 2 times 80. Take care of the 2 times 80, which is 160. 4 plus 160 is 164. 164. And we're done. Now, that's a lot of steps there, and as we get more practice with this, you'll find little shortcuts to go a little faster through it. But at this stage, if you want to make sure you're doing the steps correctly, it's better to work slowly and just following PEMDAS. When you get to the end here, we could check our answer. In fact, let's do that. So let's go to the Desmo Scientific Calculator, because what we could do is type it in to basically match what we see here. So we have 8 divided by 2, and then plus 2 starting parentheses. We have a 5 plus 3, and then parentheses, 9 minus 4, close those parentheses, have an exponent of 2, and then close those. And there's our 164. So you can use this to double check whether or not you got the correct value out when we have just numbers like this. But yeah, that's the long steps there. Again, like this 8 divided by 2, we could have simplified that at the beginning here, because you could think of like addition, subtraction as separating terms. So it's really, we're simplifying this term and this term. It's just that that right-hand term has a lot of simplifying to do before we get a number out. Okay, let's do a few more examples here. So if you like the idea of terms, of seeing like addition, subtraction, separate things, this is another way of following order of operations, is kind of recognizing, so like in this case we have 3 terms because of that addition symbol there and subtraction there. So really it could be about simplifying these 3 pieces following PEMDAS. But let's go ahead and keep with doing it all at the same time, just for that, but a little shorter to do it that way. It saves us maybe 1 or 2 steps. It's not terribly much. All right, parentheses. We have this big set of parentheses, but then within those parentheses, we want to simplify that 1 plus 3. So we have 20 over 5 plus 3 squared, parentheses, 1 plus 3 is 4, and then we're subtracting 2 minus 2 cubed. Okay, we still want to simplify those parentheses, so we have 20 over 5 plus 3 squared times 4 minus 2, which is 2, minus 2 cubed. Parentheses are done. So now we move on to exponents. So we have this exponent of 2, exponent of 3. Let's do the same reading from left to right. So we would have 20 over 5 plus 3 squared is 9. So we're going to have this 9 times 2. And then minus, and then we can go ahead and do that 2 cubed, which is 8. All right. Exponents are done. Now we move on to multiplication, division. So we have this 20 divided by 5. We also have this 9 times 2. So let's go from left to right. So 20 divided by 5 is 4. Plus 9 times 2 is 18. And then we're doing minus 8. Multiplication, division are done. So now it's addition, subtraction. And we're going to go from left to right here. So I'm going to do the 4 plus 18 first. So 22. Minus 8, and then in our last step, that'll be a 14. Again, we can throw that into the calculator to make sure we did it all correctly. And in fact, let's do that. It's better to walk away from it knowing you have it right than to just leave it and be a little unsure. So 20 divided by 5 plus 3 squared. 2 sets of parentheses with 1 plus 3 minus 2. Close those parentheses, minus 2 cubed. And it's a 14. Yay! Okay, one more example here. So this is a scenario where we have this big fraction bar of a numerator over denominator. So what we want to do is envision this set of parentheses up here and this set of parentheses down here. Because what we're going to do is completely simplify the numerator, completely simplify the denominator, and then our last step will be to divide the two. So I know in terms of Pemdas, division comes before addition, subtraction, but if we think of these as all contained within parentheses, we want to simplify those down, taking care of that addition, subtraction first, and we're leaving that division for the very end. So with that said, we're going to look at the numerator and denominator separately. So up in the numerator, we have these parentheses. So I want to simplify that 3 plus 1. I also want to simplify that 9 minus 8. So we'll have 2, and then in parentheses 3 plus 1, and then plus 9 minus 8 is a 1, and that's being squared. And then we have our fraction bar. In the denominator, we have parentheses 8 minus 6, so I want to go ahead and simplify that. So 4 times 8 minus 6 is 2, and then minus 2 squared. All right, exponents. We have a square in the numerator. We have a square in the denominator. So we're going to go 2 times 4 plus 1 squared, which is 1, over 4 times 2, minus 2 times 2, which is 4. Okay, in the numerator, now we're at multiplication division. In the denominator, we're also at multiplication division. Now this is lining up really nicely in terms of Pemdas for both. They don't have to be operating the same at the same time, if that makes sense. So like if we didn't have an exponent in the denominator here, we would have just gone on to multiplication division. So it doesn't have to line up perfectly, even though it is in this example. So 2 times 4 is 8, and then we have a plus 1, over 4 times 2 is 8, and then we're subtracting 4. And then we're going to go ahead with our last step. So 8 plus 1, or not our last step, but we're almost there. 8 plus 1 is 9. 8 minus 4 is 4. And then if we could divide it, we would, but it doesn't come out to a whole number, so we're just going to leave it like that. So let's take a look at this in the Desmos calculator and plugging that in, because the Desmos calculator has some nice organization to it. So what we could do is use this a over b function here, so that'll separate our numerator and denominator, And then I'll just go ahead and type in the numerator. So 2 times 3 plus 1 plus 9 minus 8 all squared. And then in the denominator, 4 times 8 minus 6 minus 2 squared. And what's going to happen is it's going to show a decimal out, but what we can do is use this button here, convert to fraction, and it will show you the most reduced form of the fraction. So because we didn't convert that to decimal, we can then see the fraction form matches up. All right, that's our order of operations. We're going to be using that so much. Like I said, you don't necessarily need to show as many steps as I'm showing here, but this is what it would look like to completely follow PEMDAS.